So the Microsoft-published, Rare-developed pirate game Sea of Thieves won't have loot boxes. Hooray! No more loot boxes! No, they're only going to have microtransactions. So let's all give Rare and Microsoft a big pat on the back and portray them as the good guys. Thumbs up, Microsoft. You're doing right by it. Fuck off. I'm not falling for it. In fact, I warned off this. I've written about this in the past. I said that the more game publishers cross the lines, the previous lines aren't gonna look so bad. In fact, they're gonna look positively generous. So to see people give Microsoft a round of applause as if it were being philanthropic for putting microtransactions in a $60 game, it's a little bit alarming. But I can't say it's surprising because, once again, I called it. Microsoft is gonna have its cake and fuck it too, and they're gonna get pats on the backs and rounds of applause for it, marketing themselves as heroes because they don't have loot boxes. The bar, as I feared, has been effectively lowered, and I'm not talking about Cesaro and Sheamus. While others are cheering for this stroke of loveliness, the publisher is hoping that we're going to conveniently forget that it was Microsoft that led the charge for having microtransactions in a lot more $60 games the moment this generation started. When the Xbox One launched, a bunch of first-party titles had microtransactions in them, making them fee-to-pay games instead of free-to-play games. They helped foster the environment that led to loot boxes in the first place. They can go to fuck, mate. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to entirely write off Sea of Thieves just because it's got microtransactions in it. In fact, I'm quite looking forward to it. Oh, and for you, it's just cosmetic, folks. They are just cosmetic. So you can call me an even bigger asshole. I mean, I say they're just cosmetic. You can do things with them. They're pets. And they sound like a right laugh, it's just I remember a time when a pet would be part of the game and you wouldn't have to buy it separately. It's the thing about having a long memory for the game industry practices that we've seen over the years. It sucks, because you tend to remember that what we now call DLC, what we now call microtransactions, in a lot of cases we used to call part of the game. But I am going to treat it the way I've always treated fee-to-pay games regardless of quality. I'm going to treat it the way I treated Overwatch. At least the way I treated it before I got really fucked off with loot boxes. I'm going to treat it the way I treated Plants vs Zombies Garden Warfare 2. I'm going to play it. I'm going to give it a fair shake. I may even praise it to high heaven like I did with those two games I just name-checked. They're both lovely games, great to play. But, as with any premium game that features microtransactions, Sea of Thieves will be disqualified for Game of the Year consideration. Now, it's not like the Jimquisition Awards are massively prestigious. It's not exactly a terrible blow that's going to keep Rare executives awake at night. I'm well aware I'm not that important. But that's the compromise I've always made with fee-to-pay games. And it's not going to change just because Electronic Arts push the envelope when it comes to tasteless, reckless contempt for the customer. Let me just make it good and plain and simple for people who think I'm just going to rag on Sea of Thieves and bash it because they confirm microtransactions are going to be in it. I stand by what I've always said about those sorts of games. And pretty much what I said this past Monday. If you want microtransactions, if you want free-to-play economies, make a free-to-play game. If you're charging an upfront price and you still have microtransactions, you're still a fee-to-pay game. That's been my policy for years, and it's not changing simply because loot boxes happened. And I will give credit where it's due. These pets that Rare will be offering in Sea of Thieves after launch are far from the worst kind of microtransaction you could see in the world, and they've been quite honest and upfront. They've said that they're not going to bullshit us by saying you can earn everything by playing, while failing to mention there's a huge grind for it. They've admitted there's some content you'll only be able to get via microtransaction. I'll give them major kudos. Their marketing spiel here is on point. They know what to say to make this stuff sound good. And if it's like $1 for a monkey, that might not be so bad. And that, I'm not saying because my standards have been lowered. I always said years ago that if those skins that came out at launch for Dead Space were like $1 a piece, I may have actually bought those. Instead, EA charged way over the top for them. In that regard, it might actually be a wrong move to call what Sea of Thieves has microtransactions. We won't really know until we see them fully implemented, but if they're DLC creatures publishers that are reasonably priced, it might be like those Dead Space skins. Just cheap DLC, which I do think is different from what we traditionally call microtransactions. You know, since most microtransactions revolve around getting you to keep spending with either no upper limit or a very fucking high upper limit, simultaneously using all of the psychological tricks that free-to-play games often use in order to make you spend more money. And if all of that bullshit associated with microtransactions isn't there, the cynic in me wonders if calling something like this a microtransaction is designed just to make the concept of microtransactions look like the hearty, wholesome, generous alternative to loot boxes. A bit like pushing the reset button on the progress the industry's made in gouging more money from customers. They tested how far they could push things, now they're scaling back and working their way more slowly towards where they actually want to be. So I'm going to take a wait-and-see approach, especially because Rare has already called Sea of Thieves a service, and you all know how leery I am about live services at the moment. Although I remember when they used to just be part of the game, pets as DLC might be a decent way to make money to keep the game going. It might actually be a decent trade-off for a game as a service. And if Sea of Thieves is excellent, a buck for a monkey might be something I could actually get into. But what I'm not going to be doing is applauding a game for having additional monetization strategies. That's simply not something to celebrate. And I sure as fuck won't praise Microsoft after the bullshit it's pulled over the years. What makes Microsoft's consistent foray into the realm of fee-to-pay games especially egregious is the fact that Microsoft's a platform holder. You may have noted by now that I tend to shy away from using games like Splatoon, Super Mario Odyssey, Horizon Zero Dawn as examples of how to do AAA games correctly. At least lately, after having some enlightening social media conversations and giving it a lot of thought. And that's because it's simply not fair to compare a first-party game to a third-party game. Sony and Nintendo, and theoretically Microsoft, can afford to make massive, lavish, good-looking, high-quality titles without the need for microtransactions and all that bollocks, because they've got consoles to sell. They're working from a different perspective than third-party publishers. So when it comes to monetization, I typically don't compare your first and your third-party games. But then there's Microsoft, putting microtransactions in Rise, putting microtransactions in that fucking Connect Dragon game, and doing it here too. Excuses like we're giving the game free updates and we don't want people to pay for DLC that will split the community doesn't really work, especially when you consider the fact that not only is this publisher a platform holder, you're already paying for Xbox Live. And you can suggest I'm being unreasonable, but I personally just think that's fucking egregious on Microsoft's part. Another thing to consider, and I've not done a video on this yet, is the Xbox Game Pass, which is being called Netflix for games on the Xbox One. That could undoubtedly have an effect on how monetization is perceived in future. For right now, I'm taking, again, a wait-and-see approach. See how that works with games like Sea of Thieves before deciding whether or not that's a good or bad thing. So that's basically where I'm at. I'm going to give Sea of Thieves the chance it deserves, but not having loot boxes in it is far too low a fucking bar to applaud. And additionally, Microsoft can fuck itself in general.